Okay, so I am on the road to vegan shredded, and so this is a very timely podcast for me to know the intricacies of the science behind what I'm doing. There's obviously there's a couple sides to veganism. There's obviously the ethical and moral aspect of it, and then there's also the health considerations. And the last couple of years we've seen multiple different documentaries or articles showing both sides of the story when it comes to the health aspect. You've got the extremes of game changers, which, there may be some things in there, but obviously there's a lot of exaggeration and propaganda in there. Especially when we think about the guy who went from, you've seen this, right? Guy who went from 8 minutes
Not
of
for a
battle
while.
ropes, 8 minutes of battle ropes to suddenly doing 60 minutes of battle ropes. And there's obviously a fitness component there. So I think what we wanted to do today is give a real objective view on the science behind veganism, what we need to consider. Are you at a disadvantage being vegan when it comes to health, fitness, and performance? And for those listening, it's really important that we're focusing on fitness and performance here as the key element to it, because I think it's a real missing gap in the fitness industry, especially where people who are vegan will tend to will be vegan because of ethical, environmental, moral reasons, but they're not stacking up with the science in their considerations and in their advice. So what we want to do today is make sure for anyone who is considering a vegan diet to know exactly what they need to be considering from a macro, micro, muscle building, fat loss approach. So there's an article that goes with this that's linked in the show notes that Ivan has written up, and Ivan's going to be dropping all sorts of scientific bombs. And I think what's interesting is and it really, it probably made my day on Monday when I heard about this, is when Ivan said, I've been plant-based for a couple of weeks because I wanted to dive into this experience. And from similar sort of background of someone who eats a lot of meat and someone who's come from that field was really good to hear. So over to you, Ivan. We'll kick it off with, I think a good place to kick it off is protein. Protein is always the one that people like to consider. So talk me through your experience of writing this article and kick it off with protein.
No worries. No, it's been a very interesting deep dive. This always seems to happen with a few topics for some reason. Like I start off being like, oh yeah, I'll write something, dig into this, dig into that, find the research. But then I just get deeper and deeper into these rabbit holes. I find new research, I find other stories, I find anecdotes of people who have succeeded on vegan diets. And I think now, and you would feel the same. Like a couple of years ago, it was unheard of to even see or hear of a vegan who was muscular, shredded, who could get in shape. Like, you know what I mean? It was this whole taboo of no, you need to make sure that you're getting your animal proteins in, because animal protein sources are higher quality, more bioavailable. Your body absorbs all of it. You can't get protein from plants. You can't get protein from vegetables. It's just, it all just gets, pooped out or whatever. You'd hear stories like that because, you don't absorb that protein. It's not the same, this and that. And then I bought into a lot of that early on too. I was just like, well, and I think it was back then because I grew up just eating meat. It was, it was just what we did. And there was no sort of ifs or buts about it. I had no sort of qualm. I was just like, well, I'm eating meat. I'm just going to find the research that shows, cool, eating meat allows me to do what I need to do. When you do look at the when you do objectively look at the mechanisms behind muscle protein synthesis, you understand there are certain amino acids that are needed to spark that, especially leucine, and all the other amino acids that go with it. And yes, that it is true, gram for gram or pound for pound or whatever you want to look at it, animal protein is always going to be of higher quality. Okay. Now, when I say higher quality, I just mean that our bodies can utilize, absorb, and digest pretty much 100% of it. Fantastic. That's brilliant. Which again, in a research lab and in a little petri dish shows that, okay, cool, these amino acids, they lead to a really robust muscle protein synthesis response. And, for those who are interested in building muscle, for those who are interested in changing their body, that's what we want to be doing. We want to be looking at, okay, how can we optimize muscle protein synthesis across the day? So and then you do a few deductions, you're like, okay, cool. Animal proteins seem to spike muscle protein synthesis more than plant proteins. If so facto, that means animal proteins lead to more muscle growth, and it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. I don't want to get into too deep into the mechanisms and stuff. But interestingly enough, even though mechanistically these things make sense, how they pan out in the results that we actually care about, which is muscle growth, there just doesn't seem to be a difference. A recent study just came out, it was last year, where they compared two groups of trainees. They were comparing an omnivore group and a vegan group. And the really good thing about this is that the vegans were vegans for, it makes sense, right? You're not just going to get a vegan to not be vegan for an experiment, right? So these vegans, they were vegan for quite a while, and they were resistance training for quite a while too. Same with the omnivore group. The only difference that the researchers did, just to make sure that their protein was at adequate levels, was the vegan group got like a soy protein shake after their training, and the omnivore group got a whey protein shake after their training. So everything else, they track their diet through dietary records, which we know is not 100% in Gen Pop. But for people who are actually resistance training, and for people that care about their physique, dietary recall is probably going to be the best in those sort of individuals. So I think dietary recall stuff gets poo-pooed on quite a bit, but in this specific population, I think it's very valid. And what they found over the course of 12 weeks, both groups were consuming 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilo of body weight of protein, right? Which what's that in pounds? That's less than 0.8, right? 0.6, that could be less. 0.6 to 0.7, which again may sound very low for people who think they need tons of protein, but more and more research is coming out that the numbers just don't need to be that high. It really doesn't. And so these two groups were consuming the same amount of protein per day. And the vegan group was obviously getting all their protein from plant sources. And over the course of 12 weeks, there was literally like no difference in muscle growth. Both groups gained the same amount, like both groups gained similar amount of muscle, similar amount of strength. It was very well controlled. So if there was some mechanistic thing going on here, we would see a difference there, right? You would see that, okay, the vegan group should technically have less muscle growth, right? And we know a lot of other things go into muscle growth, genetics, how you train is probably the most important thing. How you train and genetics, I think, are very important when it comes to muscle building. But it's probably the first research paper I've seen that actually has compared an omnivore group with a plant-based group, and they were protein equated. They were both training with similar programs, and they both got similar results. I think it's great. It's crazy, right? And on top of that, there was another research paper that I looked at that was looking at just protein synthesis, and yeah, again, like they compared like a wheat-based protein with like a whey-based protein, and yeah, like obviously the whey protein created a greater muscle protein synthetic response in this little thing, but how it carried out to actual muscle growth, again, no difference. So it's fascinating, you know what I mean? And we're obviously going to be extrapolating data from this, but once I started looking more and more into that sort of research, it just led me down all these other paths. And the more I got into it, the more research I did. You can literally get so much of what you need from a muscle building perspective and from a health perspective on a plant-based vegan diet. You know what I mean? Like many misconceptions I had in the past, like zinc, iron, all that's can't get any of that. You 100% can, and I'm sure we'll touch on it a little bit later on. But yeah, it was just a really, really good experience. And yeah, I always like to do things 100%, meaning that if I'm going to write about a vegan article, I coach people who are vegans, I coach people who are plant-based. I need to experience that myself. I need to, and it's been really eye-opening. It does take more effort, it does take more education, and it does take more attention to detail. And I think this is a reason why many vegans, if they go vegan for the moral and ethical side of things, which is fantastic, I think a lot of the time they disregard their health, or because they don't know what they need to consume to optimize their experience, because they all, in their minds, all they care about, as long as it's vegan, I'll eat it. So that means you're going to Burger King and still getting I'm just going to get a Beyond Meat burger. I'm vegan, I'm much healthier than the normal burger, right? Well, no, it's not. Or I have a whole packet of Oreos, it's vegan. So there's obviously that side, but I think with, again, education, understanding, and knowing what food sources to prioritize, you can really make the most of this dietary approach. And I think there are a lot of positives that we'll probably go into.
Well, that's incredible. And I think all the things you said have been myths I've been carrying around for 10 years. Because funnily enough, so me and my wife going to New York at the end of April for a quick break, and we're taking our parents. And there's this vegan restaurant we went to 3 years ago in 2019 when we were there. And when we were there, we were at this vegan restaurant because it came recommended as just the taste. The taste apparently is just incredible. And this was what wasn't. This is when I was eating everything. And we were at the dinner table discussing veganism, and it got quite heated. I was saying like, oh yeah, this is great. Like, I think this is going to be the future for sustainability. And my wife was like, I don't know. And, it was just getting quite a heated debate. And we were discussing, it's like, isn't it ironic that we're going there again? And we booked the same restaurant, and how things have changed, and how I was thinking about it. I've been thinking about this for so long, but what's held me back all these years was all these things you've just mentioned, and all these myths I've been sort of busting myself in the last 6 weeks of that. I'm going to lose all my strength. My muscles going to go down the drain. I won't be able to lose body fat. I won't be able to optimize my fitness. And this was always what was holding me back, because from all the other stuff, it was really connecting with me. But I just thought to myself, my biggest priority in life is my health and fitness. And as selfish as it sounds, I can't let that be sacrificed. I
agree.
And but going on this journey and hearing you just speak about that, I've learned as well that all it requires is a bit more thinking, a bit more planning. You have to be a bit more strategic about what you do when you go out. You have to think in advance when you go out. You can't. The ability to just rock up is probably not there yet in the world. I think we're still behind in terms of good available protein options. I think that's the big one, in that you can go out and most places will have a vegan option, but it's going to be a ravioli or a tomato-based pasta. That's what they seem to love. And
but there are ways around that. Yeah, and there are ways around that we can discuss too. But yeah, you're completely right.
It's the strategy, it's the education, it's knowing what you're doing, so you're doing it properly, so you can keep all your gains and you can continue to make gains, so that you don't have to sacrifice your ethical dilemma with your health dilemma, because both are just as important, right? So it's been really interesting. So what I want to do today is dive into these. What are these educational bits we need to consider? And you've said protein, for example, doesn't need to be as high as we've considered, so long as you're reaching that sort of 0.8 to 1.2, but potentially even lower. And that's what I'm excited to try after I go through fat loss, is like, what could we get away with? Could you get away with 0.6 and be okay? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, like, it's very interesting, and it's a whole paradigm shift for all of us. Do you know what I mean? Because all we've ever known is, protein. We prioritize proteins, number one. And agreed, it is number one for a lot of things. And, we spoke about this, especially as we age, we do want to make sure that we have enough muscle mass on us. And we do want to make sure that we go into old age as protected as possible. So there are interesting theories. And yeah, I think with the whole protein thing, for someone who's still looking to optimize their muscle building process and their body composition, it's still something that you do need to pay attention to. I think if you go into a more lifestyle solution at maintenance, you just want to be fitter, you want to be healthier, I definitely think there's leeway to lower protein if that's something that you want to consider. But you may, I think for most people who are like training seriously, I think they are still going to want to keep it at a relatively higher level. It doesn't have to be. Again, I think the 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilo, it seems to work completely fine. And research shows that there is no additional benefit after that. And I know that there were ideas of potentially for vegans and vegetarians going higher to compensate for the poorer quality proteins, right? The incomplete proteins. But as I just said, the actual real life measurements that we care about just don't seem to be showing that. And I think this is a lot of the time, there are a lot of things mechanistically can be shown, but what we care about is clinical outcomes. What we care about is how things develop in the real world. And there are many cases. I'm seeing more and more of it. I'm seeing more vegans who are jacked, who got more jacked when they went vegan, who are still performing really well, who are still growing, their blood markers are really good. So there's proof there, unless they're taking gear, and that's one thing you'll never know, right? But I think the whole protein thing, we will definitely not go full 180 on it, but I think there is enough information out there now for us to just question it and not just put it on this massive pedestal. And the thing is, I think a lot of people, when they start working with us, they've come from such a low protein intake that has led them to where they are, meaning that they are going to have to go through a period of actually increasing that intake up to something that's a little bit higher than what they may like. But I think over the long term, I think you can definitely be a bit more flexible with it. I think you can definitely be not so, okay, I need to get that exact number every single day. I think it's a good insurance policy, but I think there is more and more practical research out there showing that it doesn't have to be crazy high, and 1.6, that's pretty low.
Well, I just did a calculation now. For me, it's 120 grams.
It's very low.
Yeah.
I would still, for someone like you who's dieting now and going and trying to get super shredded. And by the way, like I saw your recent video. By the time when we're filming this, I think you put out a video of you doing like pull-ups. Like, man, you are coming in really good. You have not lost any muscle. If anything, I think you look more muscular, to be fair. And I know you've explained this on other videos, and it's not just the plant-based thing. There's obviously other positive factors going on. But you're right. If the plant-based approach was so bad, you would just be cannibalizing yourself now, right? But you're not. You're getting stronger. Yeah. You look leaner at a certain weight. I think it's working very, very well.
It's really interesting you say that, because I remember you said, I think we were discussing this maybe 6 to 12 months ago, and I think you were talking about having a higher protein as an insurance policy. So it's really cool to hear you kind of come 180 on that, and be okay with saying, look, we actually need a little bit less. And I was thinking, long term, if I was 120 grams of protein, I couldn't imagine myself doing that before. But that's barely anything. That's very
blasphemy, right?
Yeah, it's almost blasphemy. So on the protein element, like, how much do we need to worry about, say, complete and incomplete? Because this was a big thing back in the day. It's like, you got to pair your kidney beans with your almonds, sort of thing. Like, what is the?
Yeah, I used to push that too with people.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah. What's the thing? What's the thing around it? Do you need to worry about that, or is it looking at the straw too? Is it looking at it too small?
Agreed. I think it's that whole idea actually came from a book that was released in the 1970s, where I think it was a French author. I can't remember her name exactly, or the title of the book. I know it's in the article, but she mentioned she introduced the idea of combining proteins within each meal to just make sure you're getting all of them just to stay on the healthy side. But then 10 years later, she actually retracted that idea and was just like, look, as long as you get your proteins throughout the day, you're always going to. And the thing is, if you eat just an intelligent plant-based approach that's relatively intuitive, I don't like using that word, but for most people, when they are going to eat beans, they usually combine it with rice, or they combine it with grains. Oh yeah, so that's the book. For anyone who's interested, the book's called The Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappé. I think it's how you pronounce her name. So yeah, funnily enough, she actually retracted that statement and was just like, no, you just need to make sure you get enough protein for the day. You get it from a variety of sources, which again, which we encourage variety within a vegan diet. You want to be including a lot of lentils, a lot of beans. Again, we'll touch on this later, but from a nutritional perspective, lentils and black beans are absolute powerhouses, man. Like, I didn't realize how nutrient dense they are on all levels, especially like iron and zinc, as well as protein, as well as crazy amounts of fiber too, that can really help with digestion. But anything that falls into that category, soybeans, they're pretty much a complete protein as well, which is really, really interesting, which is really cool. You get all your essential amino acids.
Why did you focus on black beans? Is that of interest? Black beans and lentils? What about kidney, butter, black eye, all those?
Yeah. All those are still pretty good as well. Okay. But I think from like a nutrient perspective, I found just really high numbers of high levels of iron, high levels of even choline. You know how people used to always say you can't get enough choline on a vegan diet. Black beans, lentils, you seem to get like a really good hit of choline with them. So yeah, there's just like, when you really, for those who are interested, if you plug in your diet into a chronometer, which will give you literally a breakdown of vitamins, minerals, amino acids within your diet. There's one in the article that we're going to be discussing today that I put in based on how I would structure a vegan diet for like a 2,000 calorie person, or someone who's consuming around 2,000 calories. And just by doing that, I was able to meet all my protein targets. I was able to virtually hit every single nutrient like every single nutrient almost, you know, and again, we'll talk about supplementation later on, but there was no different to how I would, if I was to plug in like an omnivorous meal plan, I would get similar numbers, you know what I mean? So, and it just showed me how powerful, yeah, lentils and black beans are, but all those other beans that you mentioned are also really good too. So again, it's just that notion of including a variety of these foods, even like whole grains, even like oats and things like that. Quinoa was fantastic. But again, most people will mix like a grain, like quinoa, rice, with beans. It's just like a bit of a natural thing there. So you don't have to worry about that too much. What seems to matter the most is just getting a variety of food sources throughout the day. And again, that includes vegetables. You know, there's still like, it's actually not the protein content in vegetables isn't as low as I used to think as well. I used to think, it's not a protein source. But you look at like something like Brussels sprouts, 100 grams of Brussels sprouts, you get like 4 grams of protein. That's not bad. You know what I mean? Like that's okay. So it's just like when you combine all of this together, including like nuts and seeds, all this, like you're getting a good amount of amino acids within the day. What I would worry about if I was looking to optimize my performance, you just want to make sure that, okay, at each meal, are you getting a good hit of leucine? You know, so that should maybe be that should be like a fundamental protein source with each of your meals. So
how would you know that?
Again, well, it's in the article.
For those who are listening, for the listening learners,
of course. So again, black beans, lentils, and soybeans seem to be very, very high in leucine. So I would go for things like tofu, like tempeh, edamame, all that sort of stuff is going to have a really good hit of leucine. So again, if you were just to be like, okay, I'm going to have one lentil based meal, I'm going to have one say black bean based meal, black bean burrito can be really cool. I've seen so many vegan recipes as well now. Like it's been nuts. You get very creative on a vegan diet. I would have one soy based meal. And again, if you're serious about your training, I would recommend also including some supplemental protein powder. You know what I mean? Like a really good pea protein, rice protein blend seems to be the best for complete proteins, if that makes sense.
It's crazy around the incomplete and incomplete, because before, what I used to consider was like, if I'm setting up a vegan diet for someone, I wouldn't even count any of the proteins coming from oats or quinoa or beans. I just felt like I had that's zero. I had all this supplemental and soy on top.
Exactly. Me too. But when you look at it, it does add up, right? So if you're having like a really big nutritious bowl of a heap of vegetables, a heap of grains, a heap of legumes, so, you know, you're getting a really good hit of protein there too. You know, the only issue, which we'll touch on later, that could be high in calories for some people, which is why using more things like tofu and more soy-based products in a hard dieting phase just makes a bit more sense, because they don't come with the extra calories.
But well, let's segue into soy then. So soy, notorious myths around soy, around, you get moobs if you have too much soy. Just how much truth is there to that, to the whole concept and potential myth around it?
Yeah, man. So this is another huge eye opener for me too. I was in the exact same boat. I was like petrified of soy, this and that. Even though when you look at it like mechanistically, it can't really act like estrogen in the body anyway, but we won't get into that here. But what really sealed the deal for me was that there was a meta-analysis that was released in 2010 where the authors were like, look, from all the research that we've done here, it just doesn't seem to be like a really strong link to soy impacting your hormone levels to any great degree, really.
How long did they look at it?
What's that?
How long did they look at that?
Oh, it was like a meta-analysis. So it was just an accumulation of many studies, all piled into one to see results. So this is like studies that were looking at soy consumption and hormones and this and that. And even so in 2010, they were still relatively unsure. But then those same authors, they did like a revamp of that was released in 2020. So that's another article that's linked in another article that's linked in the article, but they pretty much concluded that as of late, there just doesn't seem to be any real correlation between soy consumption in reasonable reasonable amounts that we'll touch on soon, that doesn't seem to have any real correlation to testosterone, has no correlation to anything like hormonal, to any great degree. So that was crazy. And there were a few, like, because I like to look at both sides. So I went on the other side and tried to find some isolated cases. Now there was this one case where for one serving size of soy is like, say, 75 milligrams per day. Okay. Or it was something small like that. This one individual was consuming around 350 to 400 milligrams of soy every day for years on end. And yes, in that specific case, his testosterone seemed to have plummeted really, really low. But the article doesn't really dive into other things that he was doing. Like, number one, if you're consuming that much soy or whatever, like, I don't think you have a really good understanding of how to implement a vegan diet appropriately, or any diet appropriately, because anything done to excess like that. So to think about that, if you think, say 100 grams of tofu, that contains potentially like 30 to 40 milligrams of soy. Like, can you imagine how much you would have to consume to get that amount? Like, that's crazy, right?
Like a kilo of tofu a day.
Pretty much. Yeah. Like, that's nuts. So every day. Every day for a long time. And it's in that specific scenario, this individual did seem to suffer from a lot of symptoms. But I would say, was he really training? Was he sleeping well? Was he taking care of all the other things that really matter for testosterone? It's really funny, like, we'll sometimes give soy to our clients, and like, this is not to be rude, but they're already very overweight. And they talk about, oh, is the soy going to give me man boobs, or is it going to impact my hormones? It's like, well, no, being severely overweight is wrecking your hormones more than anything. You know what I mean? So, getting in shape, if that means including some soy, if that includes other food sources to get you leaner, that's going to be the best thing you can do for your hormonal health at this stage, right? And I get it. I used to fall in the same trap, but no, there just doesn't seem to be any real correlation between soy consumption and testosterone or anything like that. I did hear Eric Helms speak about, I couldn't find the paper. He did speak about certain individuals whose gut bacteria can process soy in different ways, meaning that how they extract the isoflavonoids from soy can potentially impact their blood in some way. I don't know the degree of how much that was impacting them, but there could be something there in a very select few people. But if it's something that you are concerned about, get your blood test done. Use that as like your marker. But I've seen countless people, again, consume soy for years, no issues. They're healthy, they're strong, they train hard. Those things seem to counter any potential false.
Yeah, I've known vegans who for 10 years who've eaten soy, and they're completely fine. And if anything, they're more vital than other people I meet. And I think there's so many factors to testosterone and hormones. Simple things like stress, having purpose in your life, your relationships, your body composition. Like, hormones are so holistic. Trying to put it down to one food is just impossible, right?
Just as an example, I was consuming no soy. My testosterone was plummeted. Okay. So it's because I was, too lean, not sleeping enough, this and that, right? Yeah. So I think, as you said, there are many other things that they go into hormones than just like a food component. So I think soy people shouldn't fear it at all at this stage.
There we go. That's another myth debunked. Let's go into vitamins and minerals now. Again, this is another one which comes up a lot. If you go vegan, you're now going to become deficient in every single vitamin and mineral. Which ones are the ones to think about? Which ones are genuine problem areas, and which ones are potentially myths that will be covered in a good, healthy, education-driven vegan approach?
Mm-hmm. So I think iron and zinc were big ones. I think B12 is one of those ones that, okay, that's just well known now. But we can tackle B12 first, I guess. Go on. I think if anyone's going to supplement with anything on a vegan diet, it's going to be B12. Recently, this again depends on where you live. I wouldn't rely on it though. They are fortifying more foods with B12 meaning like your plant milks, your fortified cereals, this and that. Again, we don't want to be relying on cereal for vitamins and minerals. So supplementing does seem to be the most intelligent option. On how you select a supplement, it doesn't seem to really matter. The good thing about B vitamins in general is that even if you were to consume, say, like, we only need like 2.4 micrograms per day, but most supplements come in like 1,000 micrograms, right? I'm sure you've seen that too. So, but again, the thing is that it's like, well, your body will absorb as much as it needs, and then it will just excrete the rest. And that seems to happen with all B vitamins, right? So if there's no harm in purchasing a supplement that contains, say, up to 1,000 micrograms, because you only will potentially take in that 2.4 micrograms. So B12 supplementation is one thing I recommend. In saying that though, some protein powder brands actually fortify their protein powder with B12. I know Reflex does this, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's a really nice addition. So again, check your label, plug your diet into Chronometer if you really want to know. But if your protein powder may actually be fortified with B12. So, but again, doesn't hurt to supplement. B12, again, can only be found in animal products. A lot of other things can also impact your B12 absorption. So it's always good to rule out any gastrointestinal issues. It could be good to get a blood test done, just to see what your B12 is doing, because that could go untreated. There could be something going on in your small intestine or in your stomach that is limiting the absorption of B12, because that relies on intrinsic factor, which is like an enzyme that requires that allows B12 to actually go from the gut into the bloodstream. So if that whole thing isn't functioning properly, which can be an issue if you got gut bacteria problems, then that's something that you need to consider. So I think B12, that would be the one supplement that I think all vegans should definitely be using. A bit more controversial, especially when I was reading this, was iron and zinc. I've always heard that, you're not going to be getting iron, you're not going to be getting zinc. You need to be supplementing with these if you want to optimize your vegan diet. Now, I can see again, the mechanisms and the rationale for doing this is because, number one, we'll talk about iron first. We got two types, right? We got heme iron, non-heme iron. So heme iron is the iron that is found in animal products, and every time all the iron we consume from animal products is, again, very bioavailable, 100% absorbed into the bloodstream. Fantastic, right? Not so fast. As great as that can be, when you look at non-heme iron actually has a bit of a different response in the body. And non-heme iron is just the iron that's found in plants. So, your whole grains, your vegetables, your legumes. So that means that it also comes with with a bit of a food matrix. It comes with phytate, this and that, which I'll touch on in a moment. But this because the sort of package it comes in, it's not readily available, meaning that the body has to work a bit harder to absorb it. A lot of it can also potentially pass through. But the good thing, our bodies are way smarter than we are, right? And what seems to happen is that if your body is low in iron, it will actually absorb more from the non-heme iron sources to make sure that you are getting enough iron, which is actually mind-blowing, right? So there's this little system in the small intestine. I don't know how it works, if it's some alien. And if it detects low iron, it will work hard to extract more iron from non-heme sources. But that doesn't work the same in heme iron. Heme iron just gets absorbed regardless of what the body says. And interestingly, this is where people run into iron overload, which is a real thing. I think it's called hematomicrosis. Hopefully a doctor can correct me on that, but it's when there's just too much iron in the blood. And that in of itself can run into a lot of issues, meaning that if you're plant-based and you're vegan and you're getting all your iron from plant-based sources, even if you were to consume more than you need, it's not going to be all absorbed because your body can regulate non-heme iron more effectively. Oh, that was mind-blowing. I was like, that is crazy. But again,
the body's smart, right?
Extremely
it regulates
smart,
everything, doesn't it? It regulates
it does. And yeah, but again, when we look at where most people get their iron from, most people would think, oh, it has to be red meat, it has to be this and that. But most people in the Western world actually can get their iron from plant sources.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And there's actually a lot of iron in, again, things like lentils and black beans. And I think there's even some iron in tofu and soybeans. So you can really get your iron levels up. Again, you'll see the chronometer example in the article, but I got that iron level up to like 30 milligrams, which is like could be three times the RDI, right? Which is nuts.
It's because when people think of iron, they think of blood, and when they think of blood, they think of red meat, something like that, right?
Yeah, true, exactly. But again, similar to B12, you may be consuming a lot of iron, but there could be something in the uptake of that iron. There could be other things that are hindering that. Now, iron bioavailability and absorption, there are things that we can do to make that even more efficient in vegans and vegetarians. So I should have said this as a caveat. Your body will absorb more if other things are in place, okay? Because we do have to consider phytic acid, okay? Which is, again, it's claimed like an anti-nutrient. And I think a lot of people, carnivores like to use the whole of, you can't absorb your iron because of phytic acid, all these anti-nutrients in plants, they're killing you, which is crazy. But all phytic acid is just, it's something that can easily be broken down. And the way to break phytic acid down is to simply like cook your lentils or cook your beans or ferment them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know anyone who's eating their lentils raw or there's eating their whole grains raw.
I remember this as well. Yeah.
You remember back in the day, it hinders iron, it hinders zinc. You don't want to absorb. And this was the notion of, no, you should never have any grains in your diet.
You should be soaking them for days and days and days and all that, right?
Yeah, and that's one method you can do. You can do like overnight oats. People like doing that sort of stuff. But yeah, if you're cooking your lentils, like you're cooking, you're getting rid of a lot of that phytate. But even saying that, phytic acid does have positive anti-inflammatory effects in the gut as well. So like it's never a black or white thing with nutrition. And it's funny how people will take this one, again, mechanistic idea and just go on that and be like, that's the basis for me avoiding all grains because they have phytic acid and I can't absorb any of it anyway. That's nonsense, but there are other things that you can do. And again, smart vegetarians and vegans are doing this already. If you want to enhance the absorption of iron, you also want to be consuming vitamin C. Vitamin C can, I think, increase iron bioavailability by 6-fold, which is crazy, right? Yeah. So if you're just having some fruit with your lunch or having some fruit with your lentils as a dessert or what have you, again, you're optimizing that environment for iron absorption. Another good thing, or another thing to keep in mind there, is that you don't want to be consuming, say, your coffee or your teas with your iron-rich meals because the tannins in there can actually affect iron absorption. So again, it's just practicing good meal hygiene here. If you're going to have coffee, you're going to have teas, don't have them with your meals. Have them between meals. I think most people do that anyway, right? But again, that could be another way for you to enhance the absorption of your nutrients. So I think, again, I covered iron and zinc pretty much the same in the same category because they both can be hindered by phytic acid if not paid attention to. They both come in the same food sources I just mentioned there. So again, if you're smashing the lentils, smashing the black beans, the soybeans, getting a variety of fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, you're going to be getting those nutrients. So yeah.
You covered the B12, covered the iron, zinc. The other group you had was calcium and vitamin D. As a consideration.
Yeah. Calcium, again, this is another one that was, drummed into us that, you can only get calcium from light dairy. You can only get calcium from this and that. And then there was a whole notion of, well, yeah, you do get calcium in like spinach, but because it's, you're not going to be absorbing much from spinach because of the oxalates and this and that. And again, like it's the same thing, right? But the research that I found when it came to calcium and vitamin D, this was done, the research was done on individuals who were actually practicing veganism for, say, 20 years. And again, that's probably the biggest cohort I was able to find done over many years because again, veganism is still relatively new. The research is still relatively new. So this is one population that we could look at and go, okay, cool. What does 20 years of veganism do? And what they found in this group that their bone health actually was a lot lower in comparison to, say, individuals practicing an omnivorous diet or a vegetarian diet that was consuming dairy and eggs. So, which again, we know that bone density, if you don't have strong bones, you're more prone to osteoporosis, you're more prone to breaking these bones later on in life. that's not good. Okay. Again, though, I think the bone density for this sort of population was done on individuals who are probably not weight training, who probably weren't paying attention. They were probably consuming a vegan diet, but I just don't think they were paying as much attention as they probably could to good sources of calcium, which again, that you can find a really good amount of calcium in tofu. I think the soybeans are actually set with like a calcium binder most of the time to make the tofu, right? So the firmer the tofu, the more protein you get to. But yeah, again, tofu, another really fantastic source of calcium as well. Again, your vegetables, you're going to be getting calcium in there too. But even in today's day and age, you will also be getting calcium through the plant milks. So like almond milk and, soy milk and this and that. There's calcium coming from those sources too. So I think, again, when you incorporate a variety of foods within your vegan diet, you're going to be able to cover your bases quite well. Vitamin D, no one's getting vitamin D through their diet in these days at all. Like you could consume all the salmon you want, you can consume this and that. Unless you find mushrooms that have somehow been grown with all this UV radiation going on them. I don't even know where you find them. Apparently you could get a decent hit of vitamin D there, but even whether you're carnivore, omnivorous, vegetarian, vegan, I think supplementing with vitamin D is also a good idea for most to cover their bases.
I think a big thing you're mentioning, like recurring theme here, is the whole petri dish argument versus the macro real world argument. That's like a common theme that we're seeing, right? Because all the things you've said, I remember when I first got into the fitness industry over 10 years ago, these are all the things I was hearing. It's like, oh, this new study around the phytates means you need to do this, or this mineral is now lacking, you need to do this. And it's all just petri dish arguments that in the real world don't seem to stack up, because the body is smarter and the plants are smarter than one single ingredient.
And when you look at the blood markers of, say, vegans or vegetarians who are practicing a good nutritional approach, like they're all markers seem to be in line. Zinc status good, iron status good. There was no difference between, we go back to zinc and iron. There was no difference in iron levels between omnivores or vegans or vegetarians. I know people who consume meat who are still anemic, So I think there's just more to it than just diet alone. I think diet obviously matters, but I think there are many other factors. So holistic, you're right. There's a difference between what we see in a petri dish and what we see mechanistically versus what happens in the real world. So I think nutrition is still it's still in infancy compared to other sciences. We're only taking stabs in the dark.
Yeah, and a lot of it's also like sample sizes. Like 10, 20 years ago, sample sizes of people who are vegan into their fitness and into their health was probably quite slim. People were doing it probably for like religious or ethical or environmental reasons, but they weren't caring about their fitness. Whereas now you're getting the other ones. And that's why I think that research in the next 10 years will be more interesting, because we're going to start seeing, experiments done on people who actually care about their fitness, and they 100%. Will be it'll be more like for like.
Exactly. And just go back to the calcium vitamin D thing. Like what happened was, as soon as these vegans started supplementing with vitamin D and calcium together, they must have not given them enough calcium through their diet or whatever the reason was. But as soon as they started supplementing with calcium and vitamin D together, their fracture for bone breakage and risk completely vanished, like very, very quickly, right? And which is insane. So just goes to show that you can have a very profound effect with your dietary choices too. So yeah, again, these things, just because, as you said, imagine a vegan 20 years ago, they were definitely not doing it to enhance their fitness or to get jacked, right? They were literally doing it because it's part of their religion. You know what I mean? It was done on Seventh-day Adventists, who are practicing. And again, within that group, there are people who are vegetarian, there are people who are vegan, there are people who are lacto-ovo, so it's like a variety of different forms of, say, vegetarianism, So yeah.
Well, the last one, mineral, is it's not a vitamin mineral, but something linked to it is omega-3s. Again, this is something that comes up a lot as well. What's the best thing to do for omega-3s?
So again, I was always of the opinion, and that there's just if you want to get your EPA DHA in, which is the bioavailable form of omega-3, You can only do that through, say, fatty fish consumption, so like salmon, mackerel, herring, all that stuff, or supplementing with fish oil. Those are the best ways to get those in. People were always talking about, say, flax seeds as like a source of ALA, which is like the parent form of the EPA DHA. So what happens is if we consume ALA, the idea is that we break that ALA down to EPA DHA, and then we use the EPA DHA for all the good stuff, especially DHA, by the way. But again, from when we look at the conversion from, say, ALA to those EPA DHA, the conversion rate in humans is atrocious, right? So we potentially get a 2% for most, 2 to 3% conversion rate. So if we were to consume 100 milligrams of ALA, we may get 2 to 3 milligrams of EPA DHA. Okay. And again, rough estimations that we need about 150 to 300 milligrams of EPA DHA per day. That's very, very low. But again, for health, that's probably a good place for most. You don't have to go too much higher than that. But if we were to try to get that through, say, other food sources, so something like chia seeds can actually be pretty good. Chia seeds per tablespoon, so 16 grams, you get about 3.4 grams of ALA. So that's pretty good, right? So if you were to consume, say, 30 to 40 grams of chia seeds, that's going to put you at roughly, what's that, 6.8 grams of ALA. You do that 2 to 3% conversion, you actually could get the 150 to 300 milligrams of EPA DHA. It's not bad. That's not bad. That's, and again, like you're looking at potentially an extra 250 calories per day.
Yeah.
So that could be the caveat, right? So it's like, cool, you want to add in that much chia seeds, well, then you're looking at adding this amount of energy. Now, based on your goals, that may not be applicable. Meaning, if you're hard in a diet, 250 calories coming from chia seeds, that's not much. That's not going to do much for you. So, but if you're in a lifestyle solution, you're investing, and you want to go full plant-based, and you want it to cover your EPA DHA, can be done. You're just going to have to sacrifice that 250, 300 calories, which in the grand scheme of things, probably not too much. But yeah, it can be done.
It's interesting because, again, like it's one of those things, like I used to say to people, there's no point having your flax seeds because nothing's going to convert, or the ALA is inferior and you need loads of EPA and DHA. It's like gram per percentage body fat, or like 6 grams at least. And it's like, money is like extremely expensive, but it's just popping pills nonstop, aren't you?
Yeah, and it makes you think, where do people get that information from? Like, I remember that. Yeah, the whole like you need 1 gram per body fat percentage. That's a good way to sell fish oil supplements, but the evidence for that is lacking massively. So I think for someone looking just to optimize their health, I think adding 30 to 40 grams of chia seeds every day can be great. For those who are wanting to, again, have more of an insurance cover, I would go for supplementing with some algae, especially DHA, and you'll be sweet.
Amazing. So we've covered protein, soy, vitamin, minerals, and omega-3s. Now, how do we put this all together, and how do we make this a real world application? And we've also covered the muscle building myth. So I think we've stacked all the myths away. How do we now, as a plant-based athlete, individual, health and fitness enthusiast, how do we now make this in the real world and actually cover all our bases and do it in a way that doesn't feel like it's a massive inconvenience? Because this is the big thing. It's like, well, can't we ask for all these things, all this to think about? How do I go out? How do I do things? So what are the things to consider to make it a lifestyle solution?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I agree. It's not easy, but I think if you do some trial and error, you experiment, you mix and match certain meals, you utilize everything that we touched on today. You go into you go into Chronometer, you plug in certain foods, and again, that you may have to do a lot of work on the front end, but then you're going to be able to find, once you find your base of foods, just like with any diet, you find your base of foods that you really want to work with. You find, let's just say, again, there's variations with like soy as well. There's variations in like tofu and tempeh and whatnot. So many, right? And you just have to find, okay, what do I really enjoy eating? What soy product here do I like? Okay. What are my favorite beans? What are my favorite pulses? What are my favorite legumes? What are my favorite whole grains? What nuts and seeds do I like? The great thing about a vegan diet, in my opinion, is the immense variety you have that you can choose from. And I think that, like, if you get the base of your protein sources, I think that's what really matters here. You find that strong base of nutrient dense protein sources. I think you can mix and match so many things around those meals, and I've seen a lot of creativity when it comes to like making like, Mexican burrito bowls with like, a heap of black beans, a heap of rice, avocado, a heap of vegetables, you know what I mean? You can make a really good, dense, nutritious burrito. So it's about finding dishes that you like. You have to learn, you have to get experimental. If you really want to make this a way of life, or if you really wanted to make this way of eating work for you, you're going to have to do some of your homework there. There's no easy way about it. But as with anything, the more you do it, the more, like, I personally, I don't know, I'm a nerd when it comes to this stuff, but like, I've really enjoyed discovering new ways of eating, discovering new ways to combine foods. All this, it's been really fun. So I think taking that approach of, instead of looking at, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, like, think about, let's say, you have the opportunity here to really make the most out of your diet, and serve the planet, right? You can be ethical and moral and still make you the best version of yourself, which I think is fantastic. I don't think you have to sacrifice anything to make this diet work. But you are going to have to put a bit of work in the front end to find, okay, what works for me, what doesn't. It will take you potentially a bit of time to work up to the amount of fiber that you're going to be consuming. Like, I did some little numbers the other day, and I'm hitting over 100 grams of fiber every day. So, but again, the digestion, like, took a bit of it, like, it went a little bit weird, like 1 or 2 days. But then now it's just sort of, it's the new norm, right? And it feels completely fine. It feels good. You know what I mean? Like, and again, only anecdotal as well, but I'm feeling really good. I'm recovering from my sessions really well. I'm able to tolerate more work. Feel clearer, all this sort of stuff.
Really?
I know it's only my own experience.
Really?
Yeah, and like, it's been really good. Like,
that's
really
very
good.
interesting, because you're someone who's always dialed in. So this is like
Always dialed in.
You've not gone from, like, for example, for me, I've gone into a calorie deficit. So some of these benefits I'm experiencing, I know have come from just having more clarity and cognitive, etc. But you've just literally matched your calories, I'm assuming, right?
I've matched my calories, but I feel, I just feel more satiated. I'm sleeping better. I feel like I'm functioning better. So yeah, man, it's crazy. And is that just the addition of, have I potentially removed some other foods that may not be as nutritious because I had to make room for more like legumes and more beans from like a calorie perspective, and I've had to like add more vegetables or add more this to make sure I get my nutrients in. So maybe this attention to micronutrients has just, made my diet just a lot more effective. So yeah, I've definitely noticed a difference in the last
I
week.
You're gonna get your iron cross next week.
Mate, I know, like, but that's the thing, like, even like my elbows, my shoulders, like, even after like a heavy iron cross session, they just feel, good. You know what I mean? They feel strong, they feel stable. So yeah, touch wood, like, I'm not making any jumps to conclusions, but again, like, I've potentially brought my protein down to say like 140, 150, but my carbs are like closer to say like 550, 600, so that's a lot of carbohydrates, right? But I feel fantastic, and because the vegan diet is also naturally quite low in fat too, it's very easy to sort of stay within your calories while maximizing food volume, which, I'm a big fan of. So again, food volume is a huge advantage to a vegan diet. But for those who are wanting to like practically make this part of their life, I definitely think it can be done. There are more and more vegan, vegetarian options becoming available at restaurants. Yes, some of them may not be protein rich, but in those circumstances, you can go to our other article on how to eat out and lose weight. And you can simply just, use the strategies that we've laid out in there by potentially just having a nice, delicious plant protein shake before going in. So that you've got your protein covered for that meal, even though
that's what we started off at. You said that's how you counteract the issue of the tomato pastas.
Exactly. So exactly right. So you can go into that and make sure you got your protein covered, and now you can just go for the most nutrient dense stuff there. So
amazing.
Amazing. Yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed this podcast, hearing all the different elements that you've discussed. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value from this. So if you've not checked out the article that accompanies with this, do give it a read, and do give it a share to any of your family and friends who may be plant-based, thinking about going plant-based, or as we were, skeptical about the whole thing. And I'm worried that we were going to lose all our muscle, lose all our strength, and end up looking like this stereotypical vegan that the fitness industry has painted for so many years. It's time to break that myth. So yeah, thanks for sharing all your insight. I think a lot of people are going to experience a lot of value from this.
No worries. Happy to help.